Probably the first thing I should say about Daniel Kahneman is that Daniel is in New York. So we have a very special and absolutely foolproof, cannot possibly go wrong, live link-up provided courtesy of Cisco. So down this link-up, Richard will be interviewing Danny. Daniel Kahneman is, of course, best known for his work with Amos Tversky, the late Amos Tversky, for which he won the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics in 2002. He's also very widely known for his popular psychology book, and I mean that in the sense of it sold a lot rather than that it dumbed the field down, which was Thinking Fast and Slow. Those of you paying attention to what Daniel is doing will know he's written and published very, very widely, not just in fields that we would associate with behavioral economics, and he's also been involved in trying to improve standards of replication in psychology. So a very important, influential individual, both in economics and, of course, in his own field of psychology. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Daniel Kahneman to the screen and Richard Thaler to the stage.
I can see you, Danny. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can. You look very smartly dressed.
Oh, thank you. As you know, I don't put a tie on for just anybody. So.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you. Let me start with this. You and Amos had one of the most successful academic collaborations in all of science. And much of your other work is joint. We have lots of aspiring young academics here and aspiring people in all kinds of fields. Any advice? What makes a good collaboration? How have you pulled it off? Or is it just luck?
There's a lot of luck. You got to like the people you're collaborating with. It really doesn't work otherwise. And they've got to like you. And that's, luck.
Now
and
you tell me.
And now I'm telling you. But I've just confessed to liking you. And I'm sorry, because in our interaction, I shouldn't be doing it.
But that's it?
Look, I mean, you have to enjoy working that way. It's a slow way to work. Certainly it's slow for my collaborators. I mean, they can all guarantee that. It's a slow way to work. It can be very frustrating. But if you enjoy the social interaction, then it's pretty wonderful. And then in some truly magical cases, and I think Amos and I had that magic, and to a smaller extent even you and I had a bit of magic, then the two are simply superior to either one alone. And it can be because they have complementary skills or because they have complementary knowledge, or it can be because they have complementary characters. And are able to, each of, that was the case for Amos and me, I think. Each of us brought out the best in the other. And Amos could understand the very vague things I commonly say better than I did. And that was certainly one of the big things that made our work possible.
Yeah, you certainly seem to be having more fun with Amos than when you were writing your book. Well, that's not a big thing to say.
No, that's it. Yeah. I mean, I was acutely miserable when I wrote the book, and it was a very lonely experience.
You've been doing some private sector consulting work on noise reduction, which does not seem to have affected the noise level in restaurants. So you must be working on something else. Could Could you tell us a bit about what that is? And so let's start with that.
Sure. There are many organizations in which you have lots of people essentially doing very similar jobs or making similar kinds of decisions on behalf of the organization. So you can have people approving loans. I mean, now there's a lot of robots approving loans, but you also have people approving loans. You can have people picking stocks. You can have financial advisors making decisions about which client they will seek. I mean, there are just thousands of examples. And what I would define as noise is that when you have two people making similar decisions, or essentially the same decision, on behalf of the organization, if they don't make the same decision, that's noise. And we already know from psychological research that there is a lot of noise. I mean, there is internal noise. People are not, when you show them the same information twice, even if it's an X-ray, by the way, people are very likely to give you different answers. Turns out, my sense is that this problem is completely ignored in organizations. So I can't describe my client, but the client with whom we worked has a lot of people making very similar decisions with fairly high stakes for themselves, for the organizations, and for their clients. And I asked them the question, if you have two people facing exactly the same problem, and it's a numerical problem, they're making decisions that involves quantities, what do you think the variability will be relative to the mean? What's the average difference that you expect between two randomly people facing the same problem? And oddly enough, you get 5 to 10% as an answer in many contexts I've since observed. In that organization, we could try, because we could create materials, show the same material to 40 people, and actually measure what is the average distance between two individuals. It's about 40%. And we replicated that more than once. It didn't come as a surprise to me because I knew the psychological literature. It came as a complete surprise to the organization. And that is very interesting. I mean, how come? You get people making decisions, they respect each other. There is what psychologists call false consensus. Everyone assumes that other good people would make exactly the same decision they do. Very rarely do two people independently make the same decision. So you have noise. And it turns out that noise, I don't know if invariably, but in every example that I've thought about, noise is actually very costly. So I'm interested in noise. It's a problem that hasn't been recognized. People think of bias, and most of my life I've studied bias. But noise has interesting characteristics. It's easier actually to control noise than to control bias, because you can control noise without knowing the correct answer. And that's what I engaged in.
So how do you distinguish between noise, which is bad, and diversity of opinion, which is good?
Well, the point about diversity of opinion is that it's overt and something comes out of it. That is, and you have, evolutionary noise is a very wonderful thing. You get many, so long as there is a selection process that selects the better over the worse. But so you have that in diversity. Presumably, people are solving the same problem and they know when it's solved. And diversity can help in some problems. In many problems, diversity helps. Noise is silent, actually. It's an absurd thing to say, but noise is silent. People don't know it exists, so they don't correct for it.
So you're referring to a situation where you have lots of people doing the same thing independently.
Absolutely.
And coming up with very different answers, as opposed to collaborating.
Yeah.
Lise Vesterlin this morning mentioned that psychologists have been trying to disabuse people of the idea of doing interviews for 50 years or so with little success. Is there anything from your project that might help make interviews less noisy?
Well, yes. I mean, actually, there is a general strategy for dealing with noise, and what it involves is breaking up problems into elements, dealing with the elements according to a reasonably straightforward and agreed upon technique, and then combining them according to a rule. So there are interview systems that work like that. In fact, I devised, my thinking about this, I devised an interview system like that for the Israeli army some 60 years ago. And it's based on taking the various aspects that you want to look at and dealing with them sequentially and as independently as possible and scoring each of them. And that reduces noise. It reduces noise very significantly.
So adding structure.
Adding structure. That concise summary makes me feel that I'm rambling. I could have said, would it have worked if I just said adding structure?
I cured you of rambling 30 years ago.
I know.
You haven't rambled since.
That's good.
So, what have you learned from this experience in terms of dealing with large organizations? So, how do you get buy-in? You're telling them things that they initially resist. How do you get from here to there? Because we have probably 800-900 people here, some of whom are trying to influence governments. And, you get some result, and then somebody says, you're just some psychologist. What the hell do you know? How do you get past that?
Well, you said...
Especially if you don't have a Nobel Prize,
I think every consultant should have one, because it actually does make things a lot easier. So there's an unfair advantage right there. But, who said anything about getting there? Getting from here. It's quite chancy whether or not you have influence. Some of the best ideas I've gotten absolutely nowhere. Somebody must be, and that's a chance event, must be interested in doing that. It's very important not to step on, if the change you want to introduce will cause somebody to lose status and he's in a position to block you, then you'll get blocked. And there is no guarantee on those things. Governments might be easier, I suppose, but I'm not sure they are. And dealing with things that don't offend anybody and that don't violate the procedure that people already follow in ways that would cause someone to lose status or prestige or power, that will help a lot.
This is related to another point I know you feel strongly about, which is that in designing any kind of policy, we need to worry about who the losers are going to be. You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. I believe in loss aversion. That's not new. But what I believe is that when you are introducing change, in most situations, when you're introducing change, change doesn't leave social arrangements neutral. There'll be winners and there'll be losers. And there is, I think, a basic rule. The potential losers, fight a lot harder than the potential winners. And when you look at reforms typically end being more expensive than anticipated, and usually by a lot. And I think it's that that mechanism is at work. There's an interesting finding in the study of the endowment effect. One of the more interesting ones, I think, is by our friend Jack Netch. Agents don't seem to have endowment effect. They don't anticipate the kind of loss aversion that their clients will feel. Reformers are like agents. Leaders are like agents. They don't anticipate loss aversion. They think the final state will be good. It's all wonderful. In fact, they'll create winners. They'll create losers. They'll have to compensate the losers for their loss, and it will end up being more effective, and sometimes it will fail. And all of that, I think, because of the existence of losers. So that would be the first piece of advice that I'd give to anyone interested in bringing change to any organization. Who are the losers going to be, and what are they going to be able to do to you?
Well, but it's difficult to know how you make them whole. I remember a problem you and I tried to solve about your stepdaughter leaving high school a year early, where my very stupid advice got you nowhere.
It was to buy her a Jaguar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't work.
It was a car of her choice was.
Yeah. Well, you can't always, make them whole, but sometimes you can. And here, the basic idea is one that is also at the foundation of nudges, and it's the Kurt-Lewin idea of figure out what is going to hurt. What are people actually going to lose? What is preventing them from already doing what you want them to do? And sometimes, if you just think about reducing their resistance, finding ways to compensate them, finding ways to alleviate the loss, you can reduce the resistance very substantially, but you have to be aware of it. It's not always going to be possible, but in many situations it actually is, especially when you're dealing with issues of status, prestige, power. There are ways of arranging things so that you can minimize the hurt.
So this morning in my talk, I was saying that nudge and behavioral insights have largely rested on the work of Kurt-Lewin and Bob Cialdini, who's here, and you and Amos, and that there are more psychologists and social scientists out in the world, and that we should broaden our horizons. Are there parts of psychology that you think deserve more attention from practitioners, that are ripe for practical implications?
I'm not sure. I mean, I hadn't prepared for that, so I haven't thought. There are many things that we could do, that the people who are already in that field and operating in that space could do that they're not doing. So there are whole areas of potential application of, what many people call behavior economics, and I call applied social psychology most of the time. There are many areas where we could do things that we're not doing at the moment.
Yeah, I guess it could work either way. It could be that we try to recruit psychologists who don't normally think of playing in the policy domain, or it could be reading those psychologists and realizing that they have insights that could be used in any of the, reducing crime or, obesity or whatever problem we're trying to nudge.
Yeah, clearly there are experts in a lot of areas, and But my guess is that people who are interested in prime reduction are in some ways already active in that space. So it's a matter of bringing them, of reaching out to them and bringing them to you and creating that association.
So I'm not making it clear. What I'm saying is, are those of us who are busy nudging missing branches of pure psychology that? I mean, I surprised you with this. So I mean, it's fine.
The answer is, I'm sure there are. I can't.
But you don't have one at the top of your head.
No. I do have something. I do have an answer to another question.
Well,
Yeah,
I might get to it.
at least one. Okay. If you don't, remind me.
Yeah. Okay. Here's one that you said you were willing to talk about. I couldn't make this so easy to give all the questions in advance. This was a question that someone on the team suggested, which is, do you worry, and how worried should this crowd be by the recent replication study?
Well, I think psychologists should be very worried about it. I think, I think as it happens, this crowd has less reason to worry than most psychologists. And the crowd has less reason to worry because experimentation is built into the DNA of that approach. And so long as that is kept, that you do everything in control, randomized controlled experiments, and not before, after mostly, but actually randomized control, then you guarantee your own replication. And so I think psychology should be worried, psychologists should be worried, but this particular crowd has less reason to worry than most.
Meaning that if something works, someone else will try it, and so it will get replicated. And it's not that every trial that the nudge unit runs will replicate if it's done again.
Well, that's an interesting issue, because you're absolutely right that the experimentation doesn't guarantee replication, that failures of replication are failures to replicate experiment. But the point is, if you have randomly selected your crowd from a relevant environment, and you have done it appropriately, the chances that it will replicate in that environment and with that population are really quite high. If you want to do it in another context, what you learn from the replication issue is that changes in context that we don't expect will make a difference are likely to make a difference. So I would say whenever you really move any significant step away from the experiment, redo the experiment in your new context.
So I think you also agreed to answer the following question, which is, how should young scholars think about choosing topics of research? Not what should they study, because I know you're not going to give advice about that.
Well, I'm not going to give advice about choosing a topic of study. I mean, it's sort of going to sound completely trivial. Don't study anything that is not fun for you to study. I mean, really don't do that. Don't ask yourself whether what you're doing is likely to be interesting once you have done it. So it should be fun to do. The answer that you expect to get or that you hope to get should be interesting. And you should know, and that's the hardest thing, you should know how long to persevere when things are not going well. Not too long. If it isn't going well and you have tried a couple of times, give up and get another idea. And if you can't get another idea, do something else. I mean,
So
don't do research.
I think you share. Yeah, ignore sunk costs is good advice. I think you share my view that many people spend too much time reading the literature and sort of end up doing tweaks on tweaks. Or is that just that I'm lazy, which we know you think I am, and that...
This is not a published fact.
You mean I wrote it in my book that you claim
Yes.
that I'm lazy? Yes, that's right. It is a published fact. But beyond my laziness, I mean, I'm always telling my students to be less about the literature and more about life. I mean, do you agree with that advice, or?
I think it can be taken too far, but by and large, of course, I agree with that advice. I mean, when you're in the business, when you're in the real world, you're not, in general, applying the latest result from psychological science. You are applying ideas that have been around, that have been pre-tested. And I'm interested in the discipline. I always was. In fact, I was teaching that seminar in Jerusalem 40 years ago. It's in applying psychology. It's not applied psychology. So it's applying ideas that are out there, typically big ideas, like the Kurt Lewine's ideas. That's what you do. And so for that, I agree, the literature is likely to be somewhat less relevant. Although, there are interesting things that are happening these days that people can bring to your attention, can bring to other people's attention that might be relevant. By and large, most of the good applied work applies ideas that have existed for a long time.
But I know I've heard you say that what ends up getting called applied psychology is not a part of psychology that has been held in high esteem. And is the work of units like this helping, or is that an irreconcilable problem?
I mean, in the first place, it's a geographic problem. And if you've heard me say that, applied psychology has had a very different standing in the UK and in the US. And in the UK, applications had always been intellectually respectable, much more so than in the US. So the unit for applied psychology was, one of the intellectual centers of psychology in Britain, 40 years ago or 30 years ago, maybe still is. In the United States, the word applied had a sort of inferior connotation. It lost that temporarily during World War II, so major talent flowed into applied work, and you got magnificent results. Actually, I think cognitive psychology came out of that eventually, and many other good things in psychology came from people encountering the real world. But by and large, the status of applied psychology is not high in the United States, not nearly as high as it is, I think, in the UK, and it's not an accident that what you're seeing, including, the unit that is organizing this seminar, it's not an accident it grew up in London.
I'm not sure I agree about that, but I think it's largely an accident, but we can argue about that later. Here's a question from our friend Steven Pinker, who's who's here, which is, should debiasing be part of the curriculum? So should we be explicitly trying to teach people to overcome the biases that we talk about?
I think it would be good to have in the curriculum something that makes people recognize when they should slow down and reflect on what they're doing or on what they're about to decide. We can't reflect all the time. And I think teaching about biases is usually not very effective at all. But introducing a language to talk about biases, educating gossip, as I've said, that I think could be useful, and helping people recognize situations where it is important for them to do the right thing and where they're likely, if they follow their nature, to do the wrong thing. Teaching people to recognize that is important. And today, I would, because of my interest in noise, I think that the recipe for the prescription for better decision making, for better judgment, a better organized or structured way of thinking is not oriented to particular biases. Structure in itself can be a good thing. And that's not the same as debiasing.
What was the question that I forgot to ask you?
Thank you. Well, I've been thinking about what is the next thing that behavior economics should do.
I thought that's what you didn't want to answer. Okay, good. Answer that.
Yeah, because it's not a matter of recruiting other people. I think there is an awful lot of decision making that is going on within firms and in governments. And much of it is really of very poor quality. It's evolved, it hasn't been designed. And designing procedures for making better decisions, that is a very large field. I have called it sometimes the human engineering of decisions. I mean, just seeing an organization as a factory that produces decisions, and then asking, what quality control can we apply? How can we improve the production process for making decisions? This, I think, is a huge and unexplored field, and with the increasing prestige of behavior economics and the willingness to experiment, getting into that is, I think, that is a very big challenge. That's why I was, in a way, resisting, bringing in new people. I was saying there's a lot of work for the existing crowd, because that is not very different from what the existing crowd has been trained to think about.
When we try to impose structure, though, we're going to run into another version of your loser's problem. As you know, I've been working with one of the National Football League teams and trying to get the football people to make smarter decisions is really hard, like impossible, and they strongly resist having somebody else make that for them. They think that's, picking players and deciding whether to go for it on fourth down is not something someone my size should be advising them about.
And, of course you're right, you're going to encounter this. And by the way, there are situations in which they're right. I mean, so I've interacted enough with Gary Klein, my friend and intellectual adversary, to know that the issue of when you do want to trust intuition and when you want to control intuition, that's not trivial. I don't want to eliminate intuition from decision making. What I would like to do with intuition is delay it. I would like people to consider a problem before they have an intuition about it and not after they have an intuition about it. Now, with respect to the amount of opposition that you can expect a lot of it. But that may be because you're impatient. I mean, you have to think in terms of, how long did it take you to become sort of a famous member of the establishment, president of the American Economic Association? You didn't start out seemingly going that way. It took you 25 years. And Moneyball has had an impact. It didn't have an immediate impact, but it had a substantial impact. And I think this kind of thinking is potentially promising, I think, and it could take on. And don't give up, even with football players and football teams.
Okay, so the following questions you can't blame me for. What is your most underappreciated paper and why? I know which one you think I don't appreciate enough, but...
That's true. But other people do, so that doesn't count.
Dale isn't here, so we don't need to mention it.
I really don't have the feeling that I've been treated badly by the community. So I don't carry, that kind of wish for recognition of an ignored paper. There are lots of papers of mine that, by the way, and it's something that happens with papers that are well known, that some of the best bits in the paper that are well known are ignored. People select from your papers and they select what they want. And that's not always what I would like best. For example, of my work, I would say, take non-regressive prediction and base rate neglect that Amos and I put in the same paper. Not by accident, probably. I mean, my favorite is non-regressive prediction. Amos's favorite clearly was base rate neglect. The field has taken base rate neglect. Non-regressive prediction is still a pretty esoteric idea for many people. Base rate neglect is much more common. That kind of things, arbitrary selection from things you have done, of course, there is a lot of that. But, nobody had the right to be bitter about it,
Okay, here's another question. What is the potential and limits of using nudges to increase social capital in developing countries? Yeah, I told you I didn't write this question, Danny.
Good.
All right, so here's a different question. Have you soured on your goal, your admirable goal about adversarial collaboration? Are you as pessimistic about that as you are about most things?
It didn't go very well. I mean, I had that idea that people who have, who debate should agree to settle things by experimenting and by working together. There haven't been many takers. But interestingly enough, the replication crisis is giving a new opportunity for a kind of adversarial collaboration. And I've been pushing, that's one of the main things that I've been interested in achieving, and I haven't really, but some things are happening, is that when people replicate somebody else's work, they should, in effect, invite the original author into a collaboration. The original author should be involved, the original author should criticize the replication. The idea that you can replicate somebody's work and then send them the results in the mail for their comment, I think that's non-collegial. I think it is awful behavior. And my impression is that the field is going to move that way, that replications are going to be collaborative. And so that's another version of adversarial collaboration. I have nothing to do with it, but I think this is going to happen.
Yeah, so my impression of this recent project is that it was non-adversarial in the sense that the lead authors just commissioned sort of independent parties to try to replicate a study, and they were told to consult with the original authors and make sure they get the details right.
And they did. I mean, that was the first question I asked because it was not in the original science paper. So I wrote Brian Nosek and I asked him, what did the authors do? And did the authors change their mind? Up to 50% who didn't replicate, or 75% in some cases. And the answer is, by and large, that they did collaborate. I mean, the replicators tried honestly to get and the fact that they were replicating recent work was very helpful, and the authors, by and large, played by the rules. The authors probably didn't change their mind. So, you have a finding, somebody else fails to replicate it, and all of a sudden you get, those extra 15 IQ points that you see why it was obvious that there was something wrong with the replication. This apparently happened here too.
I think one of my favorite Kahneman and Tversky sentences, which I ran across recently, involves a long-term, non-collaborative adversarial relation you've had over the years. And the sentence is that a critique of a caricature can only be a caricature of a critique.
Yeah, the term was refutation. But yes, I'm terribly embarrassed about that one, that particular sentence, that the refutation of a caricature. Refutation, I'll tell you why. The refutation of a caricature is a caricature of refutation. I was very proud of the sentence, except I found that I'd used it. It's a very good sentence. I used it twice without being aware. It's in two publications, in two separate publications. One of them less well known than the other.
Okay, I think I've run out of questions you want to answer. And we, together, are preventing everyone here from consuming alcohol. So if you don't object,
between people and alcohol,
I will say it's been nice talking to you. Thank you, Danny.
As always. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you very much to Daniel, and thank you also to Richard Thaler. Handled with aplomb. I think exemplifying the idea of adversarial collaboration there, actually.
What's that?
You exemplified the idea of adversarial collaboration in that interview. It was perfect. It was perfect.
In the interview.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it helps if you're friends.
Now, do you want to stay on the stage or get off the stage? I don't mind. Whatever you're more comfortable.
You go do your business.
Okay, thank you very much. Richard Thaler. Richard Thaler. Always good to check, Richard. I find I want to make sure you're happy. One final thing. I'm not here tomorrow. I've had a wonderful day, and I hope you would all like to join me in showing your appreciation for the staff at the hotel and, above all, for the staff who organised behavioural exchange. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you.